would say my grandmother, who raised me, who always taught me to support others. When I was a kid, I was very much inspired by the resilience of Nelson Mandela.
Welcome to Seedstars podcast. Seedstars is an organization that aims to have an impact in emerging markets by supporting the local entrepreneurs, investing in their ventures, but also sharing their story globally because we really believe they are the true heroes. We'll be listening to them and other thought leaders and disruptors that are really shaping the future of tomorrow. And we hope that together we can build a sustainable impact.
Hi, this is Papa SARR from Senegal. I'm Minister General Delegate for Entrepreneurship and supporting young and women entrepreneurs in Senegal, startups and SMEs.
Welcome to Seedstars podcast. I'm Pierre-Alain, and today I'm extremely happy because we are receiving Papa Amadou SARR from Senegal that I met recently actually, and I was extremely impressed by the work he's doing in Senegal. And I thought that if we were to do a program, that would be extremely interesting to invite him. But please, I will let you introduce yourself, Papa.
Hello, my name is Papa Amadou SARR. I'm Minister General Delegate for Entrepreneurship in the government of Senegal.
Perfect. So you're indeed a member of the government of Senegal. Before you had plenty of roles, among others, like you were in the board of governors of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the African Development Bank, and we will try to touch base on all these different topics. But now you're the head of the Délégation Générale à l'Entrepreneuriat Rapide, so which is called the DER. And I think the name is extremely interesting because you already make the difference between entrepreneurship and I would say high growth entrepreneurship. So, which I think is already very interesting as a standpoint. Can you explain a bit more what you're putting in place there?
Exactly. As you said, I started this role 2 years ago. Prior to that, I worked as Director General for Financial Sector at the Ministry of Economy and Finance, where I also served as a board member at the World Bank, IMF, and the African Development Bank. And then prior to that, I worked 3 years in the US at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And then before that, I spent 5 years in Paris at the OECD. And in a nutshell, what we do as a government is support and promote entrepreneurship, giving opportunities for youth and women that are entrepreneurs that need funding that goes from loans, equity, guarantee, and all sorts of non-financial support to help them start a business or develop a existing business in order to, not only fulfill the entrepreneurial spirit, but also allow them to have a job and create job opportunities throughout the country. Because the reason behind it is the government of Senegal and in Africa overall don't create enough jobs to absorb the amount of young, talented students that come out of college or graduate school every year. For an example, in Senegal, we have around 200,000 students that graduate, and the government can only employ 30,000 of them.
So you mean the government that these 30,000 people would go to work for the government, or in general, like these are, or even the private sector?
For the government. And so we don't have it's from the private sector, but for the government. And it's
understood.
Nutshell, people are talking about 50,000 overall, but you're not quite sure.
So it's kind of very ambitious, but and you believe then that the entrepreneurship is the way to solve that issue, right?
Well, part of it, we realized 4 years ago in 2016, we did a general survey of enterprises throughout the country, where we surveyed more than 500,000 enterprises that exist throughout the country. And we discovered that most of them were, run by individual entrepreneurs. And also through the national census we've done with the National Statistic Agency, throughout the rebasing of the GDP of Senegalese economy, we found out that 57% of the people we surveyed said that they are either entrepreneurs or would like to do entrepreneurship. So that showed us it's maybe a way of solving the problem of unemployment. And if we also take the example of Senegalese economy, the way it is, the informal sector is more than 60% of it. And most of those people that work either in urban or rural areas are in the informal sector. And by definition, they are individual entrepreneurs that are not registered and that, have activities that allow them to survive.
Why do you think they're so interested by entrepreneurship? Is it because you have these different kind of entrepreneurs, right? You have the livelihood ones where they don't have a choice, and you have the more, I think we call them opportunistic entrepreneurs, where they would see an opportunity and an innovation and they would develop it. My impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've lived also on the African continent, and of course, by default, everyone needs to be an entrepreneur because you don't have a choice. And on the other side, there are so many opportunities that a lot of people want to grasp them. Is that also your view in Senegal, or is it cultural? How do you analyze that?
I would say it's cultural at some point because the government itself doesn't create enough jobs. So most of the young people that go to school, they basically say they either want to work for private sector or start their own business. Some started at high school or at college, and they start doing some business within the campus, and they have activities outside school hours that already create the entrepreneurial spirit. Some of the entrepreneurs we funded, for instance, are still students that are master students or PhD students that are finished in their business. And then once they graduate, they continue in that business. So culturally, I would say Senegalese young people are already ready to become entrepreneurs. And the fact that the government itself doesn't create enough jobs also emphasizes that need to promote entrepreneurship.
No, that's very interesting because you said it many times since the beginning of the talk, actually, like the government does not create enough jobs. And for me, as a Swiss citizen, it's interesting phrase because the government doesn't see its responsibility as creating jobs. They should put the infrastructure, and I would say, the whole infrastructure in order for the private sector to create the jobs. It's not necessarily the responsibility. Do you see the same, or is it different?
For me also,
Okay.
government should put it together, the enabling environment that allows business to develop and to be created. That for sure, it's my view. But you have a lot of young people that they believe that it's the role of the sovereign state to create jobs as they do education programs. That's a fact that things are moving and changing.
And there is usually an interesting debate on should is it really the job of the government to foster entrepreneurship, and does it really work? And if you look at the US, for example, if you look at really the history even of Silicon Valley, etc., there were a lot of push from the government because they were financing R&D, for example. But that's a debate. I'm saying that's a debate because, of course, that's positive. That creates indeed these private companies that are becoming these big leaders, especially with a lot of examples in the US. The counter argument was that, unfortunately, the taxpayers don't necessarily get the returns. Only a small part get the returns. So the taxpayers are taking the risk. Because with the tax money, you would finance R&D, you would finance this incubation, but the returns goes to some people, which are these entrepreneurs in the end, that they risked a bit their activity. What is your view on that topic?
Well, for me, there's 2 points. The first one is compared to the US, the entrepreneurial spirit is not that much developed. In the US, when you go there, they say the self-made man, first of all. And also there are capital that exists through banks, through angels, business angels, and all sorts of investment funds that exist. You don't have that a lot in Francophone African countries, that, seed capital that exists, or that entrepreneurial spirit that, always put people the pressure to, quick start a business from school. And that's why the government of Senegal decided to put in place a fund of $50 million a year that allows those young entrepreneurs, if we will focus on women as well, to help them start a business. It was based on a census we did also that showed that the key obstacles to promoting entrepreneurship is the lack of access to capital from the banks. The banks do not lend to poor people. They lend to established business and how can I say, sustained companies or multinational companies. But all those small and medium-sized enterprises do not have enough guarantees or collaterals that allow them to get funding from the banks. That's what gave us the idea and the opportunity to create such fund as a seed fund, seed capital, but also guarantee to support our entrepreneurs to develop their business. And it's working so far.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's true that, of course, I was comparing things that are completely different contexts, like the US and Senegal. And I tend to agree with you that now you're at a stage where you need to push these entrepreneurship culture and all these ventures so that it will hopefully snowball and basically drive the economy further, etc. Maybe the US are at another stage, and the question is, should they still be supporting that, or should they leave the market play on its own? Another point that I wanted to touch base on is when we met recently. I think your approach was extremely interesting because you almost used the lean startup methodology to launch your program. This is what you've explained to me. Can you say a bit more about that? How did you all start, and how do you use a lean startup methodology within a government?
Yeah, basically what we did is I put in place a team that 90% of it came from either private sector or startups, bankers, engineers, scientists, computer scientists that I put together. We are 100 people that working within the presidency, but I would say as a quasi-private entity, because we really totally autonomous, independent of our budget, our procedures, and we work to fast track the opportunity of opening up bank accounts, formalizing, capacitating, and easy facilitating transfers and access to market. This is something that is first time ever in Senegal, and I would say even in Francophone Africa, because not most of the time to start a business, to have orders, to do formalization, to have a registration at the tribunal and all that stuff, it can take up to 3 to 6 months. But we decided to say, guys, we're going to do that in 3 weeks maximum. And we have been able to set up what we call guichet unique, one-stop shop today, that in one day you come to see us at the delegation, you enter, in our offices, you are taken care of by 2 or 3 different teams that helps you, give you guidance on your business, help you register for free, we pay no fees, and help you get the license, and also put you in touch with one of our bank or microfinance institutions that help you get your loan and start your business. And this is a startup mind within the government to support startups.
Exactly, and for me, that's why I'm so hopeful with your approach, because of exactly that. I think that we had that recently. We had to use that as well as we said, like there is this coronavirus issue. We had a big event coming up, and in a couple of weeks, we had to figure out and come up with these methodologies, finding a solution and going very, very fast. And I think that's why it's inspiring what you've done, because it seems that you are using the same methodologies that young and small startups are using as well.
And what we just done, I'm coming out of the investment committee with my team, 10 people, because we have received requests of, like, let's say 10 startups. Of the startups we funded, some of them, Firefly, We Carry, Shot Me Away, etc., Afrikmart, etc., who are facing issues because some of them are doing e-logistics. There are no longer flights coming from Europe, and then they cannot carry anymore the goods or the e-health, e-logistics. So what we decided is I put together a guarantee fund of $1 million, what we called COVID loans for the entrepreneurs in Senegal. Basically, we're giving them a 10,000 euros loan for 0% interest rates with a postponement of like 3 to 6 months payment time after the crisis to allow them to cover the recurring costs for investment that have been affected by the crisis. We have just done that 2 hours ago. This is something
that's super impressive, and especially when you think about usually when you think about government, you think about these extremely long decision processes, and here it seems that you can move quite fast.
Yep.
How come? Why?
Well, basically, we have our own budgeting process. Like what I do is I organize the meeting, and I wrote a note to the head of state to tell him to get his authorization, and then I'm pretty sure he will approve it by tonight. If he doesn't, tomorrow I'm going to send it again and call and say we have to move on before Monday. And the biggest part, we did it in 2 days. We called 100 startups that are in our portfolio that are having issues. We send them a questionnaire of 10 questions. How are you affected by COVID? What are your business model? What are your recurring costs? Are you paying your salaries? Are you surviving with your provisions? And then are you paying your rent, your electricity, etc., etc.? And then what can we do for you? How can we support you? And then, of course, you have crazy people that are asking millions of CFA, and some people that are reasonable that are asking, we just need to be supported for 2-3 months, or some that are telling us we just need you to put us in touch with the Ministry of Transport, Health, or Tourism. Some that are telling us we just need coaching and people to talk to. Or some just tell us you talk to the bank so that to stop the payment for 3 months. And then we decided together for all our loans, and this is basically a scoop because I have not even spoken about it publicly yet, that we will be able to give a 3 months grace period for all the entrepreneurs, for them to recover from the crisis. And then for those who needed, who made the request, we had 45 of them. I granted a $1 million euro funding. As I said, 0% interest rate, 10,000 euro per startups.
Wow,
Like,
and that's
$1 in French.
It seems that you're really acting as an entrepreneur, and that's not honestly what we would expect from a minister, like I was saying before. And I would like to understand, where does it come from? So maybe let's come back a bit. So you were you born in Senegal?
I was born in Senegal and raised in Senegal, and went to France after my A-level to study in Paris at Sciences Po, where I studied political science and economy, and then I did Erasmus in the UK at Essex University.
Were you born in a small village, or were you in the capital? Where were you when you were a child?
Tambacounda. It's a city like 400 kilometers from Dakar.
And your family were already in the public sector, or not necessarily?
Yeah, my dad was a officer in the police. Yeah.
So I'm trying to dig, where is this entrepreneurial mindset coming from? So I'm trying to get it. So because when we look at all your career, it's not something that comes out necessarily, So
I came back to Paris to study at Sorbonne in Sciences Po, and after my thesis, I went to work at the OECD.
So there is indeed, you have an academic background and also public sector background. But why did you initially decided to move to France, and you didn't stay in Senegal, for example?
The families that can afford it send their kids to do grad school in France or in the US or in the UK increasingly. So I had a presence in the university in France, and I profited on it, and then I have been able to go and study there for graduate school.
And then you stayed in the academic sector for a couple of years, I think 6 years in total. That's pretty long. How come did you stay so long in the academic work?
I wanted to do a PhD, basically. I was writing a PhD thesis on migration and remittances. I was looking at the linkages between remittances from Senegalese diaspora abroad and the effect on economic development back home. And when I was doing that, I had to do some tutorial and teach some undergrad students at school at Sorbonne that had to put me at some point in the academic sector. And at the same time, I was working for the OECD as a economist and a research analyst, and then coordinator of a unit entity that was in charge of private sector. Yes, I spent a year at the OECD being in charge of what we call the Emerging Markets Network. It's an entity of, let's say, 100 multinationals that are regrouped within a group, like Davos style, that meet Chatham House rule quarterly to talk about global issues, global warming, financial crisis, investment, etc., etc. So I've been able to be in touch with some of the private sector people and some of the investors within that job for a year before I moved to more role of managerial at coordination level in the office of the director, and before being headhunted by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and where I've worked in Seattle. But there I was working as a grant maker and coordinating activities across sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah, I'll come back to these Bill and Melinda Gates. I think that's extremely interesting. But just to understand, so you immediately went for the private sector, and even if you look at the topic of your PhD, it's very much a topic that's around trying to understand the development, right? And I'm trying to understand, because we mentioned before, funnily enough, a lot of the Senegalese want to become an entrepreneur, and but it's not your choice. So you've decided to go for the public sector and having this more macro approach, I would say, to the problem and to development. Why did you choose to go there? Because okay, your dad was in the police, but I don't see where the inspiration is coming from. Is it when you were in France, you met with someone, you heard something, read something? What was the pivotal moment for you?
When I was at the UK, I was interested with the Keynesians theories in the economy, and then I also studied development studies at Essex University, the developmental state, how South Korea or other countries, Singapore, and how can I say, the Emirates, the United Arab Emirates developed throughout a 30 years period of time by developing special economic zones, by putting in place strategies of export-import substitutions. And when I looked at those strategies that helped the developmental state develop a industrialized economy or service economy, it gave me the ambition to support also the development of my country, knowing that my country is coming from part of the poor countries, or least developed countries, if you want. And when I decided to come back, I had the opportunity, of course, as I say, go either in the private sector or set up my own business, work for the government. And I had the choice when the former Minister of Finance proposed me to come work for him in his cabinet as technical advisor, linked to the work I've done at the OECD, where I was advising governments on economic policy, on how to waive crisis. I remember in 2008, in the midst of the financial crisis, we were working there trying to fix the issues of the economic downturns that were happening, and trying to figure out which countries were tax havens or not, between Luxembourg, Swiss, and Paraguay, and all those countries. And from all those background and all those issues linked to fiscal legitimacy, tax and development, telecoms and development, and all those research we've done to how to impact economic development in least developing countries led me naturally to come for government and support government. But maybe I might, in a couple of years, I would go for an MBA to become an investor.
Yeah, that's interesting. And for me, when you were mentioning this topic of remittances, for example. That was the topic of your PhD. You see a lot of African entrepreneurs working on that topic, right? Because these are huge business opportunities as well. A lot of money is sent back from the diaspora back to Africa. And for some reason, you didn't take that route. So you didn't see, okay, how actually there's a huge business opportunity that I can take here. No, I will work more on the systemic part of the problem. So for me, that's also an interesting part, because I must say that if I had seen that opportunity back then, I would say, okay, I need to jump there. That's a business opportunity. I can create something.
Yeah, it's not too late, because within the delegation, we set up last month a fund of $5 million to support Diaspora. And what we want to do is to support Senegalese diaspora that want to invest in Senegal. We're creating a crowdfunding platform that will allow us to match 50 or 60% of their funding they remit to support private activities. Create a job, create a shop, buy a car, invest in real estate, transportation, healthcare, etc., etc. So there's always that link to the private side of it. I'm not only working fully on the public side. And interestingly, when I landed at the Ministry of Finance, I was advising the minister on issues related to international economic policy. And that's why I was owning the relationship with the World Bank, IMF, African Development Bank, and international foundations. And what I developed also with the minister is to develop a portfolio of international organizations that support the government activities in special sectors. And also, I was advising the Minister of Finance on all the Eurobond emissions of the last 2 Eurobond emissions we did with the roadshows in Zurich, Germany, in the Bay Area, to raise $1 billion for the government to fund government projects. So I've always been in touch with the banks and the private sector back and forth. Over the last 3 years, I've been at the Minister of Finance. So I still kept that contact with the investment world.
Then you went to work at some point in your career with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That's a foundation we work with also on some projects, and I must say that you're doing an amazing job on different topics. We work on the health topic, for example, with them and some other initiatives. Why did you decide at some point to go for a nonprofit? Why did you move there?
Well, they came for me. I didn't apply. I think we wrote a report in 2011 at the G20 in France for Nicolas Sarkozy. Bill Gates came to Paris, and then we worked together with the team to write a report on the SDGs, how the sub-Saharan African countries would need, what the sub-Saharan African countries would need to reach the MDGs before moving to the SDGs, setting up the new goals. And when we wrote that paper, I was part of the team of 3 who wrote the report and presented to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I think they loved the report, they loved my profile, and they asked me if I was not interested to come work for them. And to be honest, initially I said, well, I've never worked for a nonprofit, why would I? And it was a family-owned foundation, so I was not interested in the beginning. And then they came back after, and then they sent headhunters coming after me, making me a good offer, a good move package to Seattle for me and my wife. And then, I said, okay, wait a minute. It's the biggest foundation in the world for the wealthiest man in the world. Why not? And you don't have resource issues to do whatever you want. So I decided to go for it.
That's interesting. And once again, you're not, I want to say you're not selfish enough, in the sense that you seem to work for the others, right? It could be as a public servant or as a foundation. I have the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, that what motivates you is to try to have an impact and not necessarily grasp the opportunities for yourself. Where does it come from? Is that, again, sorry to come back to that, but your dad as well, that as a policeman is serving the country in one way or another? Is it coming from there? Is it coming from, where is it coming from?
I would say my grandmother, who raised me, who always taught me to support others. to giving a helping hand to others. And when I started to study in France, I would say at undergrad, I would tour the foyer, the residences of the migrants that are that don't have papers, where I would go and interview them. I was doing from participant observation in sociology, to do questionnaires, to try to interview those migrants to see what are their needs, what are the how can I say, investment needs, and how do they go home. And that also motivated me to write a thesis on the migration and remittances, because this contact initially with those migrants I was supporting with Médecins du Monde and Médecins Sans Frontières, and I did also some voluntary benevolent work part-time when I had opportunities over the weekend for Action contre la faim, Action against hunger, all those I would say NGO support, and it gave me also the opportunity to always help and support others.
And I'm trying to connect the dots here. So indeed, you started to work on this migration topic, and now you're working on entrepreneurship. And interestingly enough, we do work now very much on the migration issue and through entrepreneurship, because a lot of people think that if we're able to create enough jobs in developing countries, then that could help to solve part of that migration issue. So that's very interesting that actually you started from that issue to end up actually working on maybe one of the solutions now.
Exactly. And I was speaking to the European Union, and I remember, I think it was in 2011 or 10, we had a commission from the Minister of Interior in France. At that time, it was Boris Hortefeux for the French government. And then one of the requests was how to stop the migrant flows. And I remember telling them, you can't stop migrant flows as long as people have the capacity and ability to move from a border to border to wood. And what you could do is to ease and facilitate that flow of people, giving them a permit of circulation, going back and forth in their country to France, and then allowing them to send money, resources fluently home. And that will ease the movement of people and the movement of goods and movement of capital and movement of brain to support, to stop what we call the so-called brain drain. And then they didn't listen to me at some point, because they were thinking that I wanted to facilitate or increase the flow of migrants from Africa to Europe. But I warned them at that time, it was in 2011. I told them, if you don't support young Africans, you don't give them the capacity to get jobs, they will fly to Europe, they will take boats to Europe, they will go through the desert. That was in 2011. And, history gave me reason.
And that's interesting, because there is this stream of people going to Europe, but there is also another stream going in the other direction, like you actually, or the private sector as well, where you have the diaspora that is coming back because of the great opportunities now that you have on the continent. How do you analyze that part? Do you see it really as a trend also in Senegal?
Yes, that's what we call repatriation. For instance, today, I myself, I spent 15 years in Europe and the US, but I'm back. And I have a group of people, we call them Back to Senegal, group of WhatsApp and Facebook. You have around 50,000 people that of my generation that are back and that are working here in Senegal. And because the conditions of work and salaries are increasing, at the end of the day, when you go abroad, US or Europe to study, you get the degrees, you're an engineer, you're a finance guy, or engineer, you want to come back to serve your country most of the time. But even if you have some who remain there, but at the end of the day, there's always this movement of people back and forth, and it's really interesting. And those people contribute to what we call the co-development of the countries of origin and countries of reception.
And you think that the people that are living in the country actually don't see these opportunities, or they cannot grasp them because they don't have the education to grasp these opportunities? So I'm trying to understand why some people are coming back, and so because they see that, and some people that are there on the ground don't see these opportunities. Why is that?
Because there is a myth of Europe or US that Let's say El Dorado, you go to Switzerland, it's a wealthy country, not many people, you have a lot of resources, you get work easily. Compared to Senegal, South Africa, Burkina, where you have extreme poverty in some, especially rural areas. And most of the people that come to Europe, if you look at the flows of people, I did a study from between Senegal and Mali, 60% of it come from rural areas that we call the rural exodus. So they leave their village, transit to the capital, take a flight, and go to Paris. And most of them also are illiterates or have not had grad school degrees. And they go to work and in the security, restaurants, labor, all kind of job that allow them to gain money, live in very bad or poor conditions there, but secure an amount of money that will help them support their families back, invest in real estate, and come back after 10, 15 years and become, wealthy people. It's a choice. You have people that are educated, like me, who have been to college, and then for increasing the capacity, or also studying, how can I say, studies that do not exist here, or doing a master or PhD thesis that they don't need. They need laboratories that don't exist here. Decide to go to France, UK, or US, Switzerland, APFL, and then decide to come back or stay. Initially, I would say in the 90s, 80%, and we're doing a study on the trends, 80% would remain in Europe or in US, because the conditions of living and the conditions of applying what they learned, and also the capacity of research and development were much more developed in Europe, in US, than in Africa. And today I'm seeing that in the startup sector. Some of the startups I'm funding would always tell me, I want to go to US, I want to go to MIT, I want to go to Berkeley, I want to go to APFL, I want to go to Sorbonne, because I have the material, the professors, and the tools that allow me to increase and improve my research, my studies, where they don't have to lapse here in Senegal. And that's why I want to do that reverse investment, to be able to have all this capacity in artificial intelligence, in IoT, in AR, VR, and all those fab labs that those young startups need in the Silicon Valley, that they might be able to find here and stay here and develop the country.
No, I couldn't be aligned. And also an important thing that you mentioned, I think, is the perception. So they do perceive Europe or the US as the El Dorado. And I think that, and that's why we're doing this series, and we're trying to promote the entrepreneurship in general in these markets, to give role models where the locals can really identify and say, hey, look, he can do it. Maybe I can as well. And that's why we're pushing all this media, and we're trying to put a lot of emphasis on that, because I think that might change a bit, that can help at least to change the mindset, and thus people might also think, okay, maybe I can as well. There are opportunities here. I don't need to leave and take all the big risks that implies living as well your country, of course, on top of leaving your family and everything behind. There are a lot of personal implications behind these choices as well.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask another question is, what were you think your biggest challenges that you faced, either in the public or the non-profit sectors, in your different experiences?
Well, I would say, compared to the private sector, where I have not worked, but I have people that work there, is the maybe the ease of doing business, and the decision-making process that can be faster, and the access to capital in a more rapid way. Because as government, I rely on the Minister of Finance to give me the resources to develop it, to do it. Whereas if I was working for a multinational corporation or investment bank, I have my budget and I know how to spend it.
No, definitely. And another thing that I would see is that now you're working in the public sector, in the government, and obviously there's politics involved here. I'm coming from Switzerland. It's a very stable country, so you're not exposed too much of a lot of big political changes, even though that there are some challenges as well. But on the African continent, sometimes it can change from one day to another, and everything you started to build can be very frustrating, because suddenly everything changed, all the people have changed. And how do you leave that personally? Like, is it something that you're afraid of, or not necessarily, that doesn't bother you too much?
Well, I can say it's a mixed feeling, because I live in a country which has a tradition of stable democracy. There have been elections regularly every 5 years. We've been having 4 presidents up to now since our independence in 1960. So, and every government comes with its own regime, its own policies. And then, of course, the Senegalese current government, led by President Macky Sall, have that spirit. We convince him to support entrepreneurs. But who knows, the next president that might come in 2024, 2029 might decide to, change and close down my business.
Exactly. No,
But,
that's why. Yeah,
but
and that's for me
I hope
would
not.
be quite frustrating. No, for sure. But that's why I'm an entrepreneur myself, and I must say that would be the frustrating part of it. Of course, you can have, I would say, a macro impact, rather, whereas an entrepreneur you have more of a micro impact. But on the other side, you also have that uncertainty that you have to live with, and I think that might be sometimes.
It's our entity has gone so low. So even if there's a new president that comes in, before changing it, the president has to ask the parliament to do it. So who knows? And when I speak to people, either from the regime that is running or the opposition, people tend to tell me that what we're doing is good for youth and women, that it is an activity that any president would consider continuing. But we never know. Anyone who comes
For sure.
with new ideas.
I have another question, which is, if now you meet the young Papa Amadou SARR in his early 20s,
Yeah.
What would you tell him? What advice would you tell him?
I would tell him to become maybe more realistic than idealistic.
Interesting, but on the other side, you're because you have huge ambitions for the country. When we talk to you, we can feel that also, that passion, and you really want to have that big impact. So there is some kind of a dreamer part of you,
Of course.
but somehow you also are very pragmatic.
I remember when I used to be younger, 15, when I was 15 to 20 years, when people asked me, I had 2 idols. One was Kofi Annan. I would say I would become Secretary General of UN in Geneva. Or I would say, I love Bill Clinton.
You are a Seedstars hero for us, because you are dedicating part of your life to having an impact somehow. And I was about to ask you if you could share one of your heroes. So you've mentioned, is it Kofi Annan and Bill Clinton, for example, or do you have another hero that inspires you?
Yeah, my current president, President Macky Sall, inspires me. And what's important also, when I was a kid, I was very much inspired by the resilience of Nelson Mandela.
I have other questions that we asked to the different protagonists.
As a young star, I used to love Michael Jackson.
Same as me, actually. I was a huge fan when I was a kid. What would be the impact that you intend to have, and is it measurable also? So yeah, what would be the impact that you intend to have?
Every year we have, I would say, $50 million fund from the government, and my objective is before, over the next 5 years, the prospects we had with our strategic plan, which was done with Albert, is to be able to get around $500 million over the next 5 years. And so we're working with the African Development Bank and the French Development Agency, where we've been able to raise only 200 million. And we're talking to the World Bank and other private entities and business angels. So my first goal is to raise as much as money we can to support the entrepreneurs. The second objective is also to train as much as entrepreneurs that will be able to sustain the economic development in my country. And last but not least, to be able to train also the number of entrepreneurs that will be able to sustain their business in several sectors, being agriculture, crafts, tourism, transport, and digital economy mainly.
And could you recommend a book or a podcast or a documentary that had a big impact on you and that you would like to share?
Yeah, I have read a lot of books, but more in what I would say, the poetry, literature, the French literature. I'm a big fan of Romanticism period, Victor Hugo, and all those books on Les Contemplations, Les Miserables, and all this stuff. And also, I'm a big fan of François Lamartine, and all this kind of books I have been reading throughout my secondary school, at college, etc. But one of the books I have read recently that also impacted me is Le Temps de l'Afrique from Jean-Michel Severino, former French Development Agency president, that was focusing the fact that it's now the time for Africa to be able to lead the economic development, and then the future of the world will be concentrated in Africa, where we have 60% of arable lands, where we have a possibility of 2 billion young people educated, middle class by 2050, and all those optimistic theories of Africa that really rings a bell to me.
What are your own values?
My own values is integrity, honesty, and frankness. Telling whatever I think to whoever it is. I don't care, president or driver, and also resilience.
Yeah, no, we can definitely see that in the way you speak, and the few interactions I had with you was exactly, I think, what you're describing. What's word, quote, or phrase describes you best?
Sky is the limit for me.
Interesting. That's the dreamer part that we were mentioning before, and I think that's it. I've asked you all the different questions. So, of course, I would love to better understand and dig deeper in a lot of different topics with you to understand also this entrepreneurial mindset that we were able to develop. But thank you so much, really, for your time today. It's really, really appreciated. Like I said, you're one of our Seedstars hero. We hope to inspire more people with your story. So really, thank you for the time.
Thank you too for taking your time to questioning me and all the great job you're doing at Seedstars to promote and support entrepreneurs and seeds. And anything I could do to help to support, why not? And maybe in a couple of years, I would probably quit government to be in the startup sector or business sector. Who knows?
Thank you so much. So this is it. Thank you for listening Seedstars podcast. And please stay connected and stay tuned by subscribing to our Seedstars podcast channel. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to our hero's journey, and subscribe now for more stories on Seedstars podcast.